Kethy stood at the observation window of the research station, looking down at the blue and green planet below, Terra Nova. It was a beautiful world, covered with oceans and forests and cities that glowed in the darkness of space. The Genkai scholar had been studying this world and its people for 3 long years. 3 years of watching, 3 years of learning, 3 years of believing he understood everything about humanity. He was wrong. Kethis was tall, with skin that shimmered like silver in the dim light of the observation deck. His eyes were large and dark, capable of seeing wavelengths of light that no human could perceive. He had been born on a world that orbited a dying star in the Celestial Accord's territory. His people had traveled through space for over 10,000 years. They had built cities on 100 worlds. They had written thousands of books of philosophy. They believed themselves to be wise. They believed themselves to be superior. And they believed humanity was interesting but ultimately primitive. The humans of Terra Nova had achieved space travel only 80 years ago. Before that, they had been trapped on their single world, fighting wars with each other, destroying their own environment, and living in ignorance of the vast universe around them. The Genkai had watched with academic interest as the humans finally launched their first crewed spacecraft. It had taken them so long to figure out what the Genkai had known for millennia. Kethis had come to study them because they were unusual. Not intelligent, but unusual. The humans had a strange quality that puzzled the Genkai. They felt things deeply. They had art and music and literature. They formed bonds of loyalty and love that seemed almost illogical to the rational minds of the Genkai. They would fight to protect their families. They would die for their countries. They remembered their history and their dead with an intensity that bordered on obsession. These traits marked them as inferior. Surely, in the Genkai worldview, emotion was a weakness. Attachment was a liability. The rational path to civilization was through the elimination of such primitive feelings. Yet here were humans, building ships and establishing colonies across their star system, despite being ruled by their hearts instead of their heads. Kethis had filled dozens of reports with his observations. He had documented human society with the careful precision of a scientist examining an interesting specimen. He had watched as humans learned to trade with the other spacefaring species. He had seen them accept their place in the galactic hierarchy, settling into roles as laborers and craftspeople and merchants. They were useful in their way, but they were not advanced. They would never be advanced. Not really. Dr. Marcus Reed was the colony administrator, a gray-haired man with kind eyes who always greeted Kethis with polite professionalism. Reed had given Kethis full access to the colony's records and research facilities. He had cooperated fully with the Genkai's investigation. Kethis appreciated this. It made his work easier. Reed seemed to understand that the Genkai were their superiors, and that being studied by such an advanced civilization was actually a privilege. "Good morning, Kethis," Reed said, passing by the observation window one morning. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "I have not yet learned to appreciate the aesthetic qualities of atmospheric conditions," Kethis replied. "But I understand that humans find meaning in such things." Reed smiled. That smile had always confused Kethis. What did it express? Happiness? Amusement? Both? Neither? The Genkai had studied human facial expressions extensively, yet their true meaning often remained opaque. "We do," Reed said. "My daughter used to watch the sunrise every morning before school. Said it reminded her that every day was new." "An illogical attachment to the rotation of your planet," Kethis observed. "Perhaps," Reed said, still smiling. "But those are often the most important things." Kethis found this statement puzzling and returned to his data. He was analyzing patterns in human cultural production, documenting how their art and music had evolved across the centuries. It was interesting but ultimately irrelevant to any serious measure of their advancement. The Genkai were concerned with technology, space exploration, and the construction of what they called civilization. Art was simply what people created when they had nothing important to do. It was a quiet day on the research station. Quiet days were common. The humans below were productive. They built, they worked, they made things. And slowly, they climbed the ladder of civilizational advancement. one rung at a time. Kethis expected this process to take several more centuries, maybe longer. The humans would eventually reach a level of sophistication approaching that of the Genkai. Eventually. In time. Then the message arrived. It came through the main communications array, standard protocol, just like thousands of other messages that crossed the void between worlds. But this message was different. This message changed everything. A human research outpost on Kepler, 442b, had been destroyed. Not damaged. Not compromised. Destroyed. Completely. The outpost had housed 3,000 people. Scientists, families, children, all dead. The attackers were called the Soul Keepers, an ancient species from beyond the known galaxy, travelers from a neighboring galaxy who viewed all other life as beneath them. They had appeared in the sector without warning, attacked the outpost without provocation, and left without leaving any message or explanation. Kethis received the news through official channels. The research station went quiet. Throughout the colony below, something shifted. Kethis felt it even from his position in orbit. Something changed. Some fundamental thing that he could not quite measure or define. He waited for the grief. He expected humans to mourn loudly, to display their emotions in public, to demand answers and justice from the Celestial Accord. This was how humans typically reacted to tragedy. They were emotional creatures. Their responses should have been loud and chaotic, but they were not. Instead, the colony simply worked. Kethis watched the data streams flowing from the surface. Factory production increased. Mining operations expanded. Trade requests were filed. Military training intensified. But there was no panic, no riots, no public mourning or demands for action. The humans simply seemed to accept what had happened and begin preparing for something. But for what? They had no military power to speak of. They had 60 small ships, lightly armed, meant for exploration and trade, not combat. What could they possibly be preparing for? Kethis studied the encrypted military communications, though he could not decrypt them. The volume of encrypted traffic had increased tenfold in the days following the attack. Something was happening. Something large, but he could not understand what it was. He filed his reports, he documented the patterns, and he waited, watching the peaceful, productive colony below with growing confusion. 3 weeks after the attack, Kethis attended a high-level diplomatic meeting with the Celestial Accord's representatives and the leadership of Terra Nova. He sat silently, as was his custom, observing and recording. Dr. Reed spoke of compensation. General Sarah Okafor, the commander of the colony's small defense fleet, spoke of strategic alliances. The requests they made were methodical, specific, planned. They requested mining rights in 3 separate systems. They asked for additional manufacturing resources. They applied for trade agreements for rare metals and advanced materials. Each request made logical sense. Each request could be justified as part of normal economic expansion. But together, they painted a picture of something vast, something that required resources and materials and time, something that was being built in secret. When a Genkai representative asked directly what they were planning, Dr. Reed smiled that same polite smile and said simply, "We are strengthening our colony. We are prepared to stand alone if necessary." It was an answer that revealed nothing. Yet it confirmed something that Kethis had begun to suspect. The humans were not helpless. They were not waiting for rescue. They were not begging the Accord for protection and intervention. They were preparing to act. That night, Kethis received a message. It came through a private channel, unencrypted, from a human scientist named Dr. Chen. "Can we meet?" the message read. "I want to explain something," Kethis agreed, curious and confused in equal measure. When they met in a quiet corridor of the research station, Dr. Chen was direct. She was a small woman with intense eyes and graying hair pulled back in a tight bun. She looked tired, as if she had not slept in days. "You still don't understand what you've done," she said quietly, glancing around to ensure they were not being observed. "You killed our children, and now we're going to show you why that was a mistake." She turned and walked away before Kethis could respond, before he could ask what she meant. before he could demand an explanation. Kethis stood alone in the corridor, feeling something he had never felt before, something the Genkai rarely experienced. He felt afraid. And somewhere in the dark of space, hidden in the rocks and dust of the asteroid fields, humanity was building something. Something terrible. Something that would shatter everything Kethis believed about the galaxy and his place in it. 2 months later, everything would change. 2 months later, Kethis would witness the moment when a young civilization stopped being prey and became a predator. 2 months later, the entire universe would learn why you should never underestimate humanity. But for now, Kethis could only wait and wonder what was coming. And he was afraid. The station orbited silently above Terra Nova. The humans below went about their business, building their ships, training their soldiers, preparing for war. And no one in the Celestial Accord understood what was happening. No one except Kethis. And he had no one who would believe him. The quiet before the storm is often the most terrifying time of all. Not because of what is happening, but because of what is about to happen. Kethis stood at the observation window, watching the peaceful world below, and understood that everything was about to change. He was right. The weeks that followed the massacre were the strangest weeks of Kethis's entire life. He had studied many civilizations, observed many species, but he had never seen anything quite like what was happening on Terra Nova. Nothing was happening. And yet, everything was happening. The colony did not fall into chaos. The people did not riot in the streets demanding justice. There was no violence, no anger expressed in public. Instead, there was simply work. Endless, methodical work. The factories that once produced consumer goods, the clothes and electronics and entertainment systems that humans enjoyed, were being retooled. Kethis watched from the research station as entire industrial complexes were dismantled and rebuilt. The transformation was happening slowly, carefully, in a way that would not attract attention. But it was happening. General Sarah Okafor was a tall woman with dark skin and intelligent eyes. She had come from Earth, from a military family with roots going back centuries. Kethis had studied her file. She was 63 years old, experienced, and dangerous in the way that all skilled military commanders are dangerous. She had been content to command a small fleet of exploration and defense vessels. The largest ship in her command carried weapons designed for asteroid defense, not warfare. They were toys, really, compared to the military vessels of the Genkai, or the ancient civilizations of the Accord. Yet Okafor was acting like a woman preparing for total war. Kethis watched her give orders. He intercepted what communications he could. Okafor was consolidating resources. She was requesting specific materials from the mining operations. She was requesting construction contracts for hull plating and reactor components. She was asking for advanced computer systems designed for military applications. Each request was small. Each request could be explained as routine maintenance or minor upgrades. Together, they painted the picture of a massive, secret construction project. She is building something, Kethis said to himself as he reviewed the data streams flowing from the surface. He had tried to encrypt the files better, to hide more of what they were doing. But humans were clever, and Kethis had been studying them long enough to understand their patterns. He could read between the lines of their requests. He could extrapolate from their resource allocations. And the more he studied, the more concerned he became. The Genkai had a council. They governed the research station and made decisions about the human colony. When Kethis brought his concerns to them, they listened politely and then dismissed his worries. The humans are grieving, the council said. This is how they process loss. They channel their emotions into work. It is primitive, but it is harmless. I do not believe this is grief, Kethis responded. I believe they are preparing for something. Preparing for what? The council asked. They are a developing species. They have no military power. They could not threaten the Soul Keepers even if they wanted to. And the Soul Keepers are already gone. They have left this sector. There is nothing to prepare for. Kethis wanted to argue further, but he had no proof. The humans had encrypted their communications effectively. Their military plans were hidden. He had only suspicions, and the Genkai did not act on suspicions. They acted on data and logic and rational analysis. So Kethis continued to watch. He became obsessed with understanding what the humans were building. He spent hours analyzing the flow of materials. He studied the construction sites, using every sensor available to him. He broke minor security protocols to access human databases. He was behaving in ways that would have scandalized his own people if they had known. But he had to understand. One night, he received another message from Dr. Chen. "I know you're watching." The message read, "I know you're trying to understand. I can't explain everything, but I can show you something. Meet me in the cargo bay of the station tomorrow." Come alone. Kethis was uncertain. This was suspicious. This could be a trap. But he went anyway. Dr. Chen was waiting for him in the cargo bay, a dark and empty space filled with shipping containers and equipment. She looked even more tired than before. Her hands were shaking slightly. "I'm going to tell you something," she said without preamble. "And you're not going to believe me. But I'm going to tell you anyway, because you need to understand what you've done." "What we have done?" Kethis asked. "We have done nothing. The Soul Keepers attacked." "No," Dr. Chen interrupted. "Not just the Soul Keepers. All of you, the entire Accord. For 80 years, you've treated us like children. You let us trade with you. You let us work for you. You let us build our colonies. But you never respected us. You never believed we could be your equals. You looked at us and saw something less than human. Less than you, certainly." Kethis did not understand. "Humans are human. You are the humans. I do not understand your meaning." "You know what I mean," Dr. Chen said. "You look at us, and you see emotions and irrationality. You see a young species that will eventually grow up and become more like you. More logical. More rational. Less attached to things like family and loyalty and honor. But you're wrong. We don't grow out of these things. These things are what make us who we are." She paused, and her voice became harder. "The Soul Keepers killed 3,000 people. But they didn't just kill people. They killed our children. They killed our families. They killed our future. And do you know what that means? Do you understand what that means in human terms?" Kethis shook his head. "It means there is no negotiation," Dr. Chen said. "It means there is no compromise. It means every human being on this colony, and on every human world, will be willing to spend the rest of their lives working toward one goal. Revenge. Justice. Making them pay for what they did." She stepped closer to Kethis. "We spent 80 years watching you, studying you, learning from you. And do you know what we learned? We learned that you built your entire civilization on the assumption that you're smarter than everyone else. You're not. You're just older. And you made mistakes. You became complacent. You forgot what it takes to survive. And you're about to find out that we humans have not forgotten." "What are you building?" Kethis demanded. "What is happening on the surface?" Dr. Chen smiled. It was not a kind smile. "We're building," she said. "That's all you need to know. We're building because 3,000 people died. We're building because we remember them. We're building because we're human. And we're building because, finally, you're going to learn what that means." She left before Kethis could ask anything else. That night, Kethis sat alone in his quarters and tried to understand what he had learned. The humans were planning something. That much was clear. But what? How long would it take? What did they think they could accomplish? He accessed everything he could access. He studied human history, looking for patterns. He read about their wars, their revolutions, their great undertakings. He learned about humans who had sacrificed everything for abstract concepts like freedom and justice. He learned about humans who had suffered unbearable losses and then dedicated their lives to making sure it never happened again. And slowly, a terrible understanding began to form in his mind. The humans were not the passive species he had believed them to be. They were not content to remain at the bottom of the galactic hierarchy. They were not willing to accept their station. They were willing to sacrifice. They were willing to work. They were willing to suffer. They were willing to do whatever it took to achieve their goals. In other words, they were dangerous. Kethis filed a report with the Genkai Council. He requested an immediate and thorough investigation of human military capabilities. He requested that the Accord consider a military response. He requested that the research station be put on alert. The council ignored him. "There is no threat," they said. "The humans are peaceful. They are developing. They will not present a problem for centuries, perhaps millennia. Your concerns are not based on evidence, Kethis. They are based on fear, and fear is not a rational basis for action." Kethis wanted to scream. He wanted to tell them they were wrong. He wanted to make them understand what was coming. But he had no proof. All he had was intuition and analysis and a growing sense of dread. So he watched. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. And on the surface of Terra Nova, humanity prepared. In the asteroid field surrounding the system, hidden by dust and darkness, they built their ships. They trained their soldiers. They manufactured weapons. They planned and calculated and prepared for the moment when they would finally unleash everything they had been building. Kethis understood, though the council would not listen. Humanity had not forgotten. Humanity was not content. Humanity was preparing to remind the universe why you should never, ever underestimate a species that fights for its children. The quiet before the storm was almost over, and soon, the entire galaxy would feel the thunder. The message came through the communication array at dawn. Kethis was already awake, as he had barely slept in the past 2 months. He was monitoring military frequencies, watching for anything that might indicate human movement. When the transmission arrived, it was simple and direct. All civilian traffic in the Kepler 442b sector will cease immediately. This is a human military operation. Any interference will be met with force. The communication was broadcast on all channels, public and private. There was no attempt to hide it. There was no diplomacy. Just a statement of fact and a warning. Kethis's hearts for the Genkai had 3 hearts. A biological redundancy that served them well began to beat faster. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for and dreading in equal measure. He rushed to the observation deck. Around the station, alarms were beginning to sound. The Genkai Council was calling for emergency meetings. The other species on the station were demanding information. Panic transmissions were flooding the communication channels. And then Kethis saw them. They emerged from behind the moon of Kepler 442b, like an apparition from a nightmare. Ships. Dozens of them. No, not dozens. More than that. Many more. As Kethis watched, more ships continued to appear, warping in from hidden positions throughout the system. He ran the count in his head, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. 120 ships. 120 military vessels, sleek and dark, covered with weapon systems that Kethis recognized from his extensive knowledge of galactic warfare. Each one was a warship, constructed with military precision, designed for one purpose only: destruction. Where had they come from? The humans had only 60 registered ships. Even if they had hidden ships, where had they built 120 vessels without anyone noticing? The answer, Kethis realized, was that they had been watching. They had hidden construction facilities in the asteroid fields, in the darkness of space, where no one was looking. They had worked in secret, building in increments, so that no single action would seem suspicious. They had used resources they had carefully acquired over years. They had done the impossible. They had done it without the Genkai noticing. The Soulkeeper battle group was still in the sector. They had remained after the massacre, apparently believing that no species would be foolish enough to challenge them. The Soulkeepers were ancient. They were powerful. They had conquered worlds and destroyed civilizations. They viewed all other life as beneath them. They had not expected this. The human fleet moved with precision that was almost beautiful to observe. Each ship took its position. Each weapon system aligned. There was no chaos. There was no desperation. There was only methodical, calculated war. Kethis watched as the humans broadcast one final message. For the 3,000 dead of Kepler 442b. For the families that were destroyed. For the futures that were stolen. Humanity demands justice. Then they attacked. The battle that followed was over in hours, though it felt like forever to Kethis. watching from the observation deck. The human ships moved with a coordination that seemed almost supernatural. Every move was perfect. Every strike was placed with maximum efficiency. It was as if the humans had run 1,000,000 simulations, studying every possible outcome, preparing for every contingency. Because, Kethis realized, they probably had. The Soul Keepers fought back with the arrogance of a species that believed itself to be superior. They had numbers. They had experience. They had weapons that had conquered a dozen civilizations. But they had not prepared for this. They had not believed anyone would be foolish enough to attack them in their own territory. And so they died. One by one, Soul Keeper ships were destroyed. Some exploded in fireballs of radiation and fire. Some broke apart under the impact of kinetic weapons, moving at relativistic speeds. Some were disabled, trapped, and then systematically dismantled by the human fleet. The humans did not gloat. They did not celebrate. They simply did their job with cold, clinical efficiency. Kethis watched in horror as the humans deployed biological weapons. They were not the crude, indiscriminate weapons of primitive species. They were targeted, designed specifically to attack the Soul Keeper physiology. The humans had studied their enemies. They had learned everything they could about them. They had prepared countermeasures. They had built their war plan on knowledge, and analysis, and preparation. By the third hour of the battle, 89% of the Soul Keeper fleet was gone. The remaining ships fled, broadcasting surrender and begging for mercy. The humans could have destroyed them. They had the power. They had the firepower. They could have committed genocide, and none of the Accord would have been able to stop them. But they did not. Instead, they transmitted terms of surrender. They accepted the Soul Keeper capitulation, and then they began to implement an occupation that was, in many ways, more devastating than outright destruction. It was punishment through structure. It was justice through architecture. The Soul Keepers would be forced to repair the damage they had done. They would be forced to pay reparations. They would be forced to submit to a decades-long period of rehabilitation and oversight. They would survive, but they would suffer. It was, Kethis thought, the most human form of justice imaginable. General Sarah Okafor's face appeared on every communication channel. The Genkai Council was receiving her transmission. So was every other species in the Accord. So was everyone who had ever heard of humanity. The species known as the Soul Keepers have committed an act of barbarism, Okafor said, her voice calm and controlled. They have killed thousands of innocent people. Humans do not forget our dead. Humans do not forgive those who prey on our families. And humans are far more dangerous than you ever believed possible. She paused, and her eyes seemed to look directly at each observer, despite the fact that this was a recorded broadcast. Take this as fair warning to any species that thinks us weak. We are not weak. We are not primitive. We are not to be hunted or enslaved or dismissed. We are human. And we have just shown you what that means. The message ended. In the observation deck, Kethis stood very still. Around him, the Genkai Council was in chaos. Transmissions were flooding in from every corner of the Accord. Species that had not spoken to each other in centuries were suddenly contacting each other, demanding answers, demanding explanations, demanding to know how this had happened. No one had seen it coming. No one, except Kethis. A Genkai Council member approached Kethis, and for the first time, there was fear in the ancient creature's eyes. You knew, the council member said. You knew this was happening. I tried to tell you. Kethis replied quietly. I tried to warn you, but you did not believe me. How is this possible? The council member demanded. They should not have been able to build so many ships without our knowledge. They should not have had the technology. They should not have been capable of this. And yet, Kethis said, they are, and they have been. The council member walked away, leaving Kethis alone with his thoughts. Kethis looked down at the planet below, at the colony that had seemed so peaceful, so content, so harmless just months before. Somewhere down there, humans were celebrating. Humans were mourning their dead. Humans were understanding that they had finally become a true power in the galaxy. Somewhere down there, Dr. Chen was watching the same communication that everyone else was watching. And somewhere, Humans were understanding that the universe would never see them the same way again. Kethis accessed the data streams and began his analysis. He studied the human fleet. He analyzed the weapons systems. He calculated the resources they must have used to build 120 ships. The numbers were staggering. The humans had invested everything into this. They had sacrificed economic development, comfort, civilian advancement. They had poured every resource into their military for the past 15 years. Why 15 years? Kethis began to research. 15 years ago, the humans had first detected evidence of predatory species in neighboring star systems. 15 years ago, they had begun to understand that the universe was not a safe place. 15 years ago, they had made a decision. They would prepare. They would build. They would become strong. They had kept this secret from the Accord. They had hidden their construction. They had accepted the role of peaceful traders and colonists, while, in secret, they became warriors. They had waited for the moment when someone would give them a reason to use what they had built. The massacre on Kepler, 442b, had been that reason. Kethis filed his final report to the Genkai Council, knowing that it would be read and understood and perhaps finally believed. He wrote about the human capacity for preparation. He wrote about their willingness to sacrifice. He wrote about their ability to hide in plain sight while building something terrible. And he wrote about the most important thing. Humans did not forget. When humans experienced loss, when humans experienced injustice, they did not move on. They did not rationalize. They did not accept. They held the memory of that loss close, and they used it to fuel their determination. They held it so tightly that it became part of them, part of their identity, part of what made them human. And when they finally acted, when they finally unleashed what they had been building, they did it with the precision of a species that had spent years preparing for this exact moment. The galaxy had underestimated humanity, and now everyone would know the price of that mistake. The emergency session of the Celestial Accord convened exactly 72 hours after the Soul Keeper fleet was destroyed. The Great Assembly Chamber on the Central Station was filled with representatives from every major species in the known galaxy. The Genkai sat in their appointed places. The crystalline beings from the Epsilon sector took their positions. The ancient reptilians from the outer reaches arrived in formal procession. Everyone was afraid. Everyone wanted answers. Kethis watched from the observation gallery as Dr. Marcus Reed and General Sarah Okafor were brought before the council. They stood together at the center of the Great Hall, looking small against the vast architecture of the assembly chamber. Yet somehow, they did not appear intimidated. The first question came from a Genkai elder, his voice sharp with accusation. "You constructed a military fleet in secret," the elder said. "You violated numerous accords and agreements. You initiated military action without approval from this body. Explain yourself." Dr. Reed stepped forward. He was older now, Kethis thought, with more gray in his hair. The months of preparation must have aged him. Yet his voice was steady and calm when he spoke. "We did what was necessary to protect our people," Reed said. "Our children were murdered. 3,000 of them. And the galaxy did nothing. We made requests. We asked for aid. We asked for justice. And the Accord told us to wait. To be patient. To let the proper procedures take their time." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But humans are not good at waiting when our children are dead. We built the fleet because we understood something that you have forgotten. In the universe, the only justice that matters is the justice that you can enforce yourself. No one will protect you if you cannot protect yourself. No one will avenge you if you are too weak to take revenge." A different representative stood up, one of the crystalline beings, their bodies sparkling in the light. "You possess weapons of mass destruction," the crystal being said. "You used biological weapons against a sentient species. You are a threat to the stability of the entire Accord. What are we to do with you?" General Okafor responded this time, her military bearing evident in every word. "We used exactly the weapons necessary to accomplish our objective," Okafor said. "We analyzed the Soul Keeper physiology. We identified the best way to neutralize them. We acted with precision and efficiency. What did you want us to do? Die? Accept the massacre of our children and ask for nothing in return? She looked directly at the representatives. We are not a threat to the Accord because we have no desire to harm you. But I will be honest with you all. If you attempt to punish us for defending ourselves, if you attempt to disarm us or control us, then we will be a threat to you. And you should know right now that you cannot afford to make us your enemy. You have just seen what we are capable of with 120 ships. Imagine what we will be capable of in 100 years. Imagine what we will be capable of in 1,000 years. The assembly erupted in chaos, shouting, accusations, demands for clarification. The ancient rules of the Accord were being challenged. The established order was being questioned. And somewhere in all that noise, Kethis understood that the universe was changing. Over the next 3 weeks, more information emerged. The humans provided complete transparency about their military capabilities. They opened their records. They showed the Accord everything they had built. And what the Accord found was staggering. The humans did not just have 120 ships. They had military installations on 7 different moons and asteroids. They had weapons caches hidden throughout the system. They had constructed a second fleet that was currently under construction and would be completed in 3 years. They had biological archives containing genetic samples of the entire human species, stored in multiple locations. If humanity's homeworld was destroyed, they could rebuild from genetic material alone. Most terrifying of all, they had documentation of plans. Decades of plans. Plans for expansion. Plans for conquest. Plans for what they would do if various species attacked them. They had been preparing for wars that had not yet happened, building defenses against threats that were only theoretical. Why? Demanded a representative from an ancient species. Why build so much? Why prepare for so many contingencies? Dr. Chen appeared before the council, though no one had requested her presence. The Accord allowed her to speak anyway. She stood in the Great Hall and looked directly at the assembled representatives. Because, she said simply, we learned from your history. We read the records of civilizations that were destroyed because they were unprepared. We read about species that were conquered because they were weak. We read about billions of people who died because their governments were not ready for war, and we made a decision. We decided that humanity would never be unprepared. We decided that our children would never be slaughtered because we failed to prepare. She paused, and her voice became harder. You have all congratulated yourselves on your civilization, on your advancement. You believe you are superior to younger species like us. But I have studied your history, and I know the truth. You were all like us once. You were all young. You were all hungry. You were all willing to do whatever it took to survive. But as you grew older, you grew complacent. You believed that you had conquered the universe. You believed that there were no more enemies. You believed that peace was inevitable. She looked around the assembly. You were wrong. The universe is not peaceful. It is full of predators. And you had forgotten how to be hunters. We have not forgotten. We will not forget. Because we are human, and humans remember. Humans remember their dead. Humans remember their promises. Humans remember their threats. And humans never forget a lesson learned in blood. The assembly had no response to this. In the weeks that followed, the Accord attempted to come to some kind of agreement with humanity. There were proposals to limit human military expansion. There were suggestions to incorporate humanity into some kind of controlled framework. There were even whispers of a preemptive military strike to contain this new threat. But nothing came of these proposals. The reason was simple. No one could attack humanity without risking a war they could not win. The humans had proven their capacity to wage war. They had proven their willingness to do so. And they had made it clear that any attack on their world would be met with overwhelming force. The only choice left was acceptance. The Celestial Accord voted, after heated debate, to grant humanity full recognition as a sovereign military power. They offered humanity a permanent seat on the governing council of the Accord. It was not a gesture of friendship. It was a gesture of respect, born from fear. Kethis watched the final vote from the observation gallery. When humanity was granted full status in the Accord, the human delegation did not celebrate. They simply accepted, with the same calm and professionalism they had shown throughout the entire process. Later, after the assembly was dismissed, Kethis requested a private meeting with Dr. Chen. They met in a small chamber, designed for diplomatic discussions. Just the two of them, the Zhenkai scholar and the human scientist. "You knew all of this," Kethis said. "From the beginning. You knew what we were building. You knew what you were capable of." "Yes," Dr. Chen acknowledged. "We knew that one day, the universe would finally understand. We knew it would take an event like the massacre on Kepler 442b to force that understanding. But we were patient. We were willing to wait." "And now?" Kethis asked. "What happens now?" "Now," Dr. Chen said, "we become what we were always meant to be, a power in the galaxy, a voice in the council, a species that cannot be dismissed or ignored. We become equals." "No," Kethis said slowly, understanding something that seemed to disturb him deeply. "You become superior. Your population is growing. Your resources are abundant. Your manufacturing capability is advancing exponentially. In 100 years, humanity will be the most powerful military force in the Accord. In 500 years, you will dominate. In 1,000 years, you will be unstoppable." Dr. Chen smiled slightly. "Perhaps," she said, "but we did not want to conquer the galaxy. We only wanted to make sure that no one would dare try to conquer us. There is a difference." "Is there?" Kethis asked. Before Dr. Chen could answer, Kethis stood and left the chamber. He walked slowly back to his quarters, his mind reeling. The Zhenkai had believed themselves superior. They had believed they understood the nature of power and civilization and advancement. They had been wrong. Humans were not advanced despite their emotions. Humans were advanced because of their emotions. Because they loved deeply, they fought fiercely. Because they remembered their dead, they prepared for war. Because they attached meaning to concepts like loyalty and honor and family, they were willing to sacrifice everything. The Zhenkai had spent 10,000 years eliminating their emotions, refining their logic, becoming purely rational. And in doing so, they had made themselves weak. They had made themselves predictable. They had made themselves vulnerable to a species that still possessed the fire of youth, the hunger of a young civilization, the passion of a people who still believed that their actions mattered. Kethis had come to study humanity, believing himself to be observing an interesting but ultimately inferior species. He left that observation, knowing that he had witnessed the birth of a galactic power, a power that would shape the destiny of the entire known universe. And all because the humans remembered their dead and refused to forgive those who had killed them. Kethis sat in his private quarters aboard the research station, reading through the data one more time. It had been 6 months since the destruction of the Soulkeeper fleet. 6 months since humanity had revealed itself as a true power in the galaxy. 6 months since Kethis's entire understanding of the universe had been shattered and rebuilt into something new. His task had been given to him by the Zhenkai Council: write a comprehensive report on human civilization for the entire Accord. A report that would help the other species understand what had happened, why it had happened, and what it meant for the future of galactic society. It was perhaps the most important assignment of Kethis's entire life. He had filled 300 pages. He had analyzed human psychology, human history, human society, and human biology. He had tried to explain the inexplicable. He had tried to make logical the seemingly illogical, and he had come to conclusions that disturbed him deeply. Kethis took a moment to look out at the space around him. The research station orbited the same world it had always orbited. Below, Terra Nova continued its rotation. The humans continued their lives, but everything had changed. Everything would be different now. He pulled up the footage again, the recordings from the battle against the Soulkeepers. He watched the human fleet move with perfect precision. He analyzed every maneuver, every attack, every tactical decision, and what he saw was not chaos. He did not see the emotional irrationality that the Zhenkai had always associated with humans. What he saw was calculation, preparation, years of planning executed with absolute perfection. How long, Kethis wondered, had it taken the humans to develop their military strategy? How many simulations? How many war games? How many hours of human lives spent in preparation for a battle that might never have come? But it had come, and when it did, the humans had been ready. Kethis received a message on a private channel. It was from Dr. Chen, inviting him to visit the surface of Terra Nova, to see the colony with fresh eyes, to understand, finally, what he had been studying all along. Kethis accepted the invitation. The shuttle descended through the atmosphere of Terra Nova, and Kethis watched the world unfold beneath him. The blue oceans, the green forests, the cities that glowed with electric light. It was beautiful. It had always been beautiful. But now Kethis saw it differently. He saw not a primitive world struggling to advance, but a world that had chosen its path deliberately. Dr. Chen met him at the landing site. She had aged in the months since they last spoke, but her eyes were sharp and alert. She led him through the colony with obvious pride. "This is where we live," she said. "These are our homes. These are our schools and hospitals and places where we build and create. This is our civilization." They walked through a memorial garden, a place where the names of the 3,000 dead from Kepler 442b had been engraved on stone monuments. Humans stood before these monuments, some weeping, some standing in silent respect. An elderly man placed flowers at one of the monuments, saying something quietly that Kethis could not hear. "That's David Martinez," Dr. Chen said softly. "His granddaughter died at Kepler 442b. She was 12 years old, a brilliant child. She wanted to be a xenobiologist." Kethis felt something he could not quite identify. It was not a logical reaction. It was something deeper, something that the Genkai did not often experience. It was sorrow. It was understanding. It was the beginning of empathy. "We will remember her," Kethis said quietly. "Yes," Dr. Chen replied. "You will. And that is the point. Humans do not forget. We carry our dead with us. We carry their memory forward into the future. That is why we fight. That is why we build. That is why we are here." They walked further through the colony. Dr. Chen showed him the factories that had been retooled from production back to civilian use. She showed him the schools where human children were learning. She showed him the universities where humans were developing new technologies, new medicines, new understanding. 3,000 people, Dr. Chen said as they walked. That is what humanity chose to avenge. Not a strategic loss, not an economic disaster, but 3,000 people. 3,000 individual lives, each one connected to someone else. Someone who loved them, someone who would grieve them, someone who would work to ensure that no one else would experience that same grief. They stopped at the highest point in the colony, a hill that overlooked the entire settlement. From here, Kethis could see for miles in every direction. He could see the future that humans were building, and he began to understand. "You ask why we built the fleet," Dr. Chen said. "You wonder why we invested so much, why we sacrificed so much. The answer is this: because we love, because we are attached to each other, because we value individual life, because we remember, because we are human." She turned to face Kethis directly. The Genkai believe that these things are weaknesses, that emotions make you weak, that attachment makes you vulnerable, that memory is a burden. You have spent 10,000 years trying to eliminate these things from yourselves, and in doing so, you have made yourselves empty. You have made yourselves safe, perhaps. But safety is not the same as strength. True strength comes from having something to fight for, from having someone to fight for. Kethis did not argue. He understood now, in a way that his logical mind had been unable to process before. The humans were not advanced despite their emotions. They were advanced because of their emotions. Their capacity to love deeply, to feel loss sharply, to remember completely, these were not weaknesses, these were strengths. "Come," Dr. Chen said. "There is one more place I want to show you." She led him to a memorial building, a vast structure dedicated to preserving human history. Inside, displayed in careful detail, was the entire history of humanity, from their emergence as a species on ancient Earth, through their wars and conflicts, through their art and science, to their achievement of space travel and their growth across the stars. And embedded throughout this history, preserved and honored, were the memories of the dead, not as statistics, but as individuals, each one named, each one remembered, each one part of the story of humanity. Kethis walked through the memorial slowly, reading names and dates and brief descriptions of lives lived and ended. He was moved in a way that he could not explain through logic alone. He understood, finally, what it meant to be human, not just to live, but to live in connection with others, to care about the lives around you, to remember those who had passed, to honor their memory by continuing, by building, by creating a better future. When they exited the memorial, it was approaching sunset. The sky above Terra Nova turned colors that Kethis had never fully appreciated before. Orange and red and purple, fading gradually into darkness. It was, he understood now, beautiful. The Genkai Council requested that you write a report, Dr. Chen said. What will you tell them? Kethis was silent for a long moment. I will tell them the truth, he said finally. I will tell them that we have been wrong. For 10,000 years, we have believed ourselves to be superior. We believed ourselves to be advanced because we had eliminated emotion. We believed ourselves to be wise because we had removed attachment. But we were wrong. True wisdom comes not from the elimination of feeling, but from the understanding of what those feelings mean. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I will tell them that humanity is not a species we can ever truly defeat. Not through superior firepower. Not through superior intellect. What makes humanity formidable is something we cannot quantify through scientific measurement. It is the human capacity to sacrifice everything for those they love. It is the human ability to endure loss and continue forward. It is the human commitment to remember what must never be forgotten. Dr. Chen smiled. I will tell them, Kethis continued, that we must choose now what kind of relationship we will have with humanity. We can choose to see them as a threat and attempt to contain them. That would be a mistake. Humans cannot be contained. They can only be accommodated or opposed. And opposition would be wise only if we were prepared to fight an enemy that has already proven it will win. He looked at Dr. Chen. Or, we can choose a different path. We can choose to respect humanity. We can choose to learn from them. We can choose to understand that civilization does not come from the elimination of the things that make us individual and alive. It comes from the channeling of those things into something constructive, into something beautiful, into something lasting. Dr. Chen extended her hand, a human gesture of agreement and respect. Kethis took it, understanding the meaning of the gesture in a way that he had never understood it before. Thank you, Dr. Chen said, for finally seeing us, for finally understanding. I am sorry it took so long, Kethis replied. That night, Kethis completed his report. He sat at his desk for hours, writing carefully, choosing each word with precision. He wrote about the Soul Keeper battle. He wrote about the human military capabilities. He wrote about the hidden fleets and the secret construction projects. He wrote about the culture of remembrance that had driven humanity to prepare for a war that no one else had seen coming. And finally, at the end of the report, he wrote his conclusion. Humanity is not a species we can ever truly defeat through superior firepower or intellect. They will match us in both, or surpass us. What makes them truly formidable is something we cannot quantify. The human capacity to sacrifice everything for those they love, to remember wrongs committed against them, and to pursue justice with the patience and determination of a species that thinks in centuries, not years. We are not observing a young civilization learning to walk among the stars. We are witnessing a predator taking its place among us, one that has learned to smile, to trade, and to negotiate. But the teeth are still there. The claws have only been sheathed, not removed. The question we must ask ourselves is not, how do we contain humanity? But rather, how do we ensure that humanity never has a reason to turn those claws on us? The answer is the same as it has always been. Respect, fairness, and the acknowledgement that the meek do not inherit the galaxy. The strong do, and the strong must choose to be merciful. Humanity has chosen mercy. But we should not mistake mercy for weakness. Mercy is the choice of the strong. The weak have no choice. They are forced to accept whatever comes. But humanity could have destroyed the Soul Keepers completely. They could have committed genocide and moved on. Instead, they chose occupation, rehabilitation, reparation. They chose to be better than their enemies. This is what makes them truly dangerous. Not their weapons, not their ships, but their choice to be better than those who oppose them. The universe will never be the same. Humanity has taken its place as a galactic power, and the galaxy must now adjust to this new reality. Kethis sent the report to the Genkai Council. Then he stood at the observation window one last time, looking down at the world below. Somewhere on Terra Nova, humans were mourning their dead. Somewhere, humans were building the future. Somewhere, humans were teaching their children to remember, to honor, to continue forward even when the path was difficult. And Kethis finally understood what he had been trying to understand from the very beginning. Humanity was not primitive. Humanity was not weak. Humanity was simply human. And that was enough. That was everything. That was enough to shake the foundations of the entire galactic order. The universe, Kethis realized, would never be the same.